What if I told you that 8 of the most potent natural antibiotics ever studied by science are probably growing through your lawn right now, and most people spend their weekends pulling them out and throwing them away? That is not folk medicine. It is backed by peer-reviewed research, and the compounds these plants produce inhibit the same bacteria that pharmaceutical antibiotics target. Today we go through all 8. Stay with us, because the one you keep mowing over every week might be the most powerful one on this list. Subscribe now so you never miss a video like this. Number 1. Broadleaf plantain. Number 1 is broadleaf plantain, Plantago major, and if you have a lawn, you almost certainly have it. This plant grows in flat, low rosettes in compacted soil, along driveways, between pavers, and in thin patches where the grass never seems to fill in. Most homeowners pull it without a second thought. That decision is worth reconsidering, because what this plant does at the chemical level has been confirmed in dozens of peer-reviewed trials, and the results are not subtle. Plantain has been used as a wound herb and infection fighter on every inhabited continent for thousands of years. In North America, indigenous peoples called it Englishman's foot because it seemed to follow European settlers wherever they went, appearing near their settlements and along well-worn trails. They adopted it into their own medicine quickly, using crushed leaves to clean cuts, draw out splinters, and treat wounds showing signs of infection. In medieval Europe, plantain appeared in sacred herb lists and Anglo-Saxon medicinal texts dating back to the 9th century. The Greeks and Romans used it for well over 1,000 years before that. Modern laboratory research has confirmed that reputation honestly. Plantain contains 2 primary antimicrobial compounds: aucubin, an iridoid glycoside, and bicalene, a flavonoid. Studies published in Phytomedicine and the Journal of Ethnopharmacology show that extracts from Plantago major inhibit Staphylococcus aureus, Staphylococcus epidermidis, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, and Escherichia coli. Staphylococcus aureus is the most common cause of skin infections in the United States, and MRSA, its antibiotic-resistant form, kills more Americans each year than the HIV virus. Researchers note that plant-derived compounds like aucubin are significantly harder for bacteria to develop resistance to than single-molecule pharmaceutical antibiotics, which bacteria can mutate around far more quickly. Beyond its antimicrobial action, plantain also contains allantoin, a compound that accelerates new cell growth and wound healing, and mucilage, which forms a protective coating over irritated and damaged tissue. Fighting bacteria while also supporting tissue repair is something no pharmaceutical antibiotic on the market does on its own. Plantain grows in USDA plant hardiness zones 3 through 9 and returns as a perennial in most of those zones, coming back year after year from the same root system, whether you replant it or not. The leaves are most potent when young, before the plant sends up its narrow seed spike. Fresh leaves crushed into a poultice work directly on minor wounds, insect stings, and bee stings. Dried leaves steeped into tea have been used traditionally for respiratory infections and urinary tract irritation. Coming up next, number 2 has been growing in virtually every American yard for generations, and modern science has confirmed it fights bacteria in ways that might change how you think about your lawn. Number 2. Dandelion. Number 2 is dandelion, Taraxacum officinale, and there is almost no yard in the United States that does not have at least a few. Americans spend an estimated $700 million a year on products specifically designed to eliminate it. If that same energy went toward understanding what the dandelion actually does, the picture would look very different. Dandelion has been used in traditional medicine across Europe, Asia, and North America for at least 1,000 years. In Chinese medicine, it appears in texts dating to the 7th century, prescribed for abscesses, breast inflammation, and liver conditions. Native American tribes, including the Cherokee, Iroquois, and Ojibwe, used it for fevers, skin conditions, and digestive problems. European herbalists in the medieval period described it as a universal remedy, and it appeared in virtually every pharmacopoeia on the continent before synthetic medicine took hold in the 20th century. What research has confirmed is that dandelion contains a range of bioactive compounds with real antimicrobial activity. Chicoric acid and chlorogenic acid, two polyphenols found in high concentrations in both the leaves and roots, have been shown to inhibit Staphylococcus aureus and Bacillus subtilis in laboratory studies. A 2014 study published in Evidence-Based Complementary and Alternative Medicine found that dandelion root extract demonstrated activity against both gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria, with notable results against Salmonella typhi, which causes typhoid fever. Separate research in the Journal of Medicinal Food identified antifungal properties against Candida albicans, a fungal organism responsible for significant health problems in immunocompromised people. The flowers contain luteolin, an anti-inflammatory flavonoid studied for its ability to reduce oxidative stress in immune cells. That means dandelion is doing more than fighting bacteria directly. It is also supporting the cellular conditions that your immune system depends on to respond effectively in the first place. Dandelion is one of the most nutrient-dense plants you can eat. The leaves contain more beta-carotene than carrots and more calcium than milk by weight, along with substantial vitamin K, which plays a direct role in bone density. Every part of the plant is edible. Young leaves in salads, roots roasted as a coffee substitute, flowers made into fritters or wine. All of it gets pulled, bagged, and thrown out by people who have never been told what they are discarding. Dandelion grows in USDA plant hardiness zones 3 through 10 and behaves as a perennial across most of that range. Its taproot, which can reach 18 inches deep, stores nutrients and antimicrobial compounds through winter, and the plant regrows in spring from that same root system. The most medicinally active time to harvest leaves is early spring, before the first flower opens and before the bitterness intensifies. Stay with us because number 3 has been used on battlefields for wound care for thousands of years, and it is probably blooming in a forgotten corner of your yard right now. Number 3. Yarrow. Number 3 is yarrow, Achillea millefolium, and the name itself points directly to its history. Achillea comes from Achilles, the Greek warrior of legend, who, according to ancient accounts, used the plant to treat his soldiers' wounds during the siege of Troy. Whether the myth is literal history or grew up around the plant's usefulness, yarrow's role as a battlefield wound herb is documented across virtually every culture that encountered it, and modern pharmacology has given that ancient knowledge a precise molecular explanation. Yarrow is a low-growing perennial with finely divided feathery leaves and dense clusters of small white or pale pink flowers that bloom from late spring through summer. It spreads by both seed and underground runners, and in neglected corners of lawns, along fence lines, and in rough ground, can form dense mats that resist removal. In USDA plant hardiness zones 3 through 9, yarrow is reliably perennial and essentially self-maintaining once it establishes. You rarely need to replant it, and in many cases, you cannot fully remove it once it is there. The antimicrobial compounds in yarrow include achillin, achillicin, camphor, and sesquiterpene lactones. A 2011 study published in Phytotherapy Research tested yarrow essential oil against 25 different bacterial strains and found inhibitory activity against 23 of them, including Staphylococcus aureus, Klebsiella pneumoniae, and Clostridium perfringens. Clostridium perfringens is responsible for gas gangrene, one of the most destructive wound infections in recorded human history. That a common lawn plant inhibits it in laboratory testing is a finding worth paying attention to. Yarrow also contains the flavonoids apigenin and luteolin, both of which have confirmed anti-inflammatory properties in research settings. That combination of antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory activity is exactly what wound healing requires. You are not just reducing the bacteria, you are also calming the immune overreaction that, if left unchecked, causes as much tissue damage as the infection itself. One thing worth noting before you work extensively with yarrow: it belongs to the Asteraceae family, which includes ragweed and chrysanthemums. People with significant sensitivities to that plant family can occasionally develop photodermatitis, a skin reaction that appears when sensitized skin is exposed to sunlight after contact with certain plant compounds. This is uncommon, but doing a patch test on the inner arm before applying yarrow broadly is a reasonable step. The vast majority of people have no reaction at all. Fresh yarrow leaves can be applied directly to bleeding wounds to help slow blood flow. Dried flowers and leaves make a tea used traditionally for colds, fevers, and upper respiratory congestion. Tinctures extract the active compounds more completely and keep significantly longer than dried material. Number 4 is coming up next. It grows in lawns all over the eastern half of the country. It smells unmistakably of garlic when you mow over it, and what it produces chemically is nearly identical to one of the most studied antimicrobial foods in human history. Number 4, wild garlic. Number 4 is wild garlic, also called crow garlic, botanical name Allium vineale. If you have ever mowed a section of lawn and noticed a distinct garlic smell rising from the cut grass, this is almost certainly what you have. It grows in dense clumps of hollow, tube-like leaves that look similar to grass from a distance until you get close and notice the hollow cross-section and the unmistakable scent. It spreads aggressively through both seeds and underground bulblets, and conventional lawn care does very little to stop it. Most homeowners find it a persistent frustration. What they rarely know is that the chemistry responsible for that frustration is also responsible for one of the most thoroughly documented antimicrobial mechanisms in plant science. Wild garlic produces allicin through exactly the same enzymatic reaction as cultivated garlic. When the plant tissue is damaged, the enzyme alliinase converts a compound called alliin into allicin, a sulfur-containing molecule that disrupts bacterial RNA synthesis. That mechanism is why allicin works against antibiotic-resistant bacteria that have evolved defenses against conventional drugs. Research published in Microbios confirmed allicin activity against MRSA, vancomycin-resistant Enterococcus, and Helicobacter pylori, the bacterium responsible for the majority of stomach ulcers in the United States. The concentrations required for clinical effect are higher than a small poultice provides, but the biology is genuine, and the centuries of folk tradition around garlic family plants as infection remedies is backed by solid chemistry. Beyond its antibacterial action, allicin has demonstrated antifungal and antiviral activity in multiple research studies. Studies on allium species have found activity against Candida albicans and several influenza strains. Research published in the Journal of Antimicrobial Chemotherapy found that garlic preparations disrupted the permeability of fungal cell membranes in ways that prevented normal function and reproduction. Here is something critically important before you harvest wild garlic from your yard. It must smell unmistakably like garlic when you crush or bruise a leaf. That smell is your confirmation. Anything that looks similar but has no garlic scent is not wild garlic. The most dangerous lookalikes are death camas and lily of the valley, both of which are toxic and produce no garlic odor whatsoever. Do not harvest or eat any plant from this group without confirming the garlic scent. That smell test is what separates a useful wild food from a serious poisoning risk. Wild garlic grows in USDA plant hardiness zones 4 through 9 across much of the eastern and central United States, where it naturalized after being introduced from Europe. Young leaves harvested in early spring carry the highest allicin content. They work like chives in the kitchen, used raw in salads or blended into pesto. The underground bulblets function like small garlic cloves. The flavor is sharper than commercial garlic and fades quickly with heat. Number 5 is next, and it has been quietly growing in sunny patches across American yards for centuries. What researchers found inside it stopped antibiotic scientists in their tracks. Number 5, St. John's wort. Number 5 is St. John's wort, Hypericum perforatum, one of the most studied medicinal plants on Earth that millions of Americans walk past without recognizing. It grows in open, sunny areas, along roadsides, in overgrown fields, and at the edges of lawns that border open ground. The leaves are small and oval, and when you hold one up to bright light, tiny translucent dots become visible that appear to be holes, which is exactly what the species name perforatum means. In midsummer, it produces dense clusters of bright yellow 5-petaled flowers that bloom for weeks. Most people walk right by it. Researchers have spent decades trying to fully account for what it does. St. John's wort has been used medicinally since ancient Greek and Roman times. Hippocrates described its properties. Dioscorides included it in his Pharmacopoeia. Medieval European healers used it for wounds, nerve pain, and what they called melancholy. The name comes from the plant's tendency to bloom around the feast of St. John the Baptist on June 24th. In American folk medicine, early settlers used it for wound infections, burns, and nerve damage, and it remained a standard household remedy well into the early 20th century before being largely forgotten. The antimicrobial compounds that attracted serious scientific attention are hypericin and hyperforin. A study published in FEM's Microbiology Letters found that hyperforin is active against gram-positive bacteria, including MRSA and vancomycin-resistant staphylococcus, two of the most dangerous antibiotic-resistant organisms in modern medicine. A study in pharmaceutical biology found that Hypericum perforatum extracts inhibited bacterial biofilm formation, which matters because biofilms are how bacteria protect themselves from both immune responses and conventional antibiotics. Disrupting biofilm is one of the most important challenges in treating chronic bacterial infections, and most pharmaceutical antibiotics do it poorly. Something must be said clearly before anyone uses St. John's wort internally. This plant has serious, well-documented interactions with many prescription medications. It activates a liver enzyme pathway called CYP3A4 that accelerates how quickly the body processes certain drugs, reducing their effective levels in the blood. Medications affected include antidepressants, particularly SSRIs, where combining them can trigger serotonin syndrome. Also affected are birth control pills, warfarin and other blood thinners, cyclosporin used by organ transplant patients, and several HIV antiretroviral medications. If you take any prescription medication regularly, speak with your doctor before using St. John's wort in any form internally. These interactions are confirmed in clinical literature and can cause real harm. St. John's wort grows in USDA plant hardiness zones 3 through 8 and is perennial across that range, dying back in winter and returning reliably from the root system each spring. The flowers and buds at peak bloom in midsummer carry the highest concentration of active compounds. Infused into oil at that time, they produce the traditional bright red oil used topically for nerve pain, sciatica, muscle soreness, and minor wounds. The red color comes from hypericin extracting into the carrier oil. Number 6 has been creeping through shaded corners of American lawns since colonial times. It was the original brewing herb before hops took over, and what it does against bacterial infection has been confirmed in modern laboratory work. Number 6. Ground ivy. Number 6 is ground ivy, Glaucoma heteracea, a creeping, low-growing plant with rounded, scalloped leaves and small, blue-purple flowers that shows up in shaded, moist areas of yards across most of the United States. It spreads by runners that root at every node they touch, covering large areas of bare ground under trees and along shaded fence lines with what looks like a continuous mat. Most lawn guides describe it as one of the most stubborn weeds to remove because of how aggressively it colonizes spots where grass struggles. What those guides skip is what the plant contains and why it was once among the most valued herbs in European medicine. Ground ivy was the dominant brewing herb in England and Northern Europe for centuries before hops became the standard. It went by the name alehoof and was used to flavor, clarify, and preserve beer at a time when clean fermentation was a real public health issue. Monasteries grew it as a medicinal plant, using it as an expectorant for chest congestion, an eye wash for infected or irritated eyes, and a treatment for what they described as ringing or noise in the head, which we now call tinnitus. When European settlers came to North America, ground ivy came with them, or followed, and it naturalized so completely across the continent that most Americans today have no idea it is not a native plant. The primary antimicrobial compound in ground ivy is rosmarinic acid, a polyphenol it shares with rosemary, sage, and lemon balm. Laboratory studies have confirmed that rosmarinic acid inhibits Staphylococcus aureus and multiple gram-negative bacterial strains. Research published in Food Chemistry identified significant antioxidant activity alongside the antimicrobial effects, consistent with the plant's traditional role in supporting tissue recovery from infection. Ground ivy also contains the terpenes pulegone and menthone, which add to its overall antimicrobial profile. One thing worth knowing if you keep horses or livestock: ground ivy contains pulegone at concentrations that are toxic to horses when consumed in quantity. The resulting neurological and pulmonary symptoms can be serious. Horses grazing a diverse pasture are unlikely to eat enough to cause harm, but if ground ivy is spreading across a grazed area, it is worth managing. For people and typical household pets, normal garden-level exposure does not carry the same concern. Ground ivy grows in USDA plant hardiness zones 4 through 9 and is highly shade-tolerant, succeeding in spots where almost nothing else will establish. The aerial parts harvested in spring carry the highest concentration of rosmarinic acid. Dried ground ivy has been brewed as tea for centuries for sinus congestion, mild ear infections, and upper respiratory illness. Number 7 may be the most nutritionally complete weed on this entire list. It fights bacteria. It contains more omega-3 fatty acids than most land plants ever measured, and a woman who was present at the founding of the United States pulled it from her kitchen garden and put it in her salad. Number 7. Purslane. Number 7 is purslane, Portulaca oleracea, a thick-stemmed plant with paddle-shaped, waxy leaves that shows up in vegetable beds, garden paths, compacted soil edges, and the cracks of pavement all across the United States. The reddish stems and succulent leaves store water efficiently, which is why purslane survives heat and drought that kills every other weed in the bed. Most gardeners pull it as fast as it appears, sometimes multiple times in a single growing season. In France, Italy, Turkey, Greece, and Mexico, it is sold in markets and served in restaurants. The United States is largely alone among developed nations in treating it as something to discard. Purslane has been cultivated and eaten for more than 4,000 years. Ancient Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, and Arabic physicians all wrote about it as both food and medicine. It remained a standard kitchen garden plant in Europe and the Middle East without interruption through the medieval period and into modern times. Abigail Adams, writing during the American Revolutionary War period, mentioned pulling purslane from her kitchen garden to use in salads, which tells you that early Americans knew it as food before it gradually disappeared from garden culture and slipped into the category of nuisance weed. The antimicrobial properties of purslane come from quercetin, camphorol, apigenin, and alkaloids, identified in multiple laboratory studies as having inhibitory activity against Staphylococcus aureus, Escherichia coli, and Salmonella typhi. A 2011 study published in the African Journal of Biotechnology confirmed clear antimicrobial activity, with the strongest results against gram-positive bacteria. Beyond its antimicrobial compounds, purslane contains the highest concentration of omega-3 alpha-linolenic acid of any land plant ever analyzed. A study published in Prostaglandins, leukotrienes, and essential fatty acids confirmed this and noted that purslane's omega-3 content is comparable to levels found in some fatty fish. Omega-3 fatty acids reduce systemic inflammation, which is the biological environment that both bacterial infections and many chronic diseases depend on to persist. Purslane is also rich in vitamins A, C, and E, along with calcium, magnesium, and potassium. When the full nutritional picture is considered alongside the antimicrobial compounds, this plant looks less like a weed and more like one of the most nutritionally complete functional foods growing in American yards for free. The entire aerial plant is edible, raw or cooked. Young stems and leaves are the most tender, with a mild, slightly tangy flavor from the malic acid they contain. They work well in salads, add a pleasant texture to grain dishes, and cook down similarly to spinach. Purslane grows in USDA plant hardiness zones 4 through 11 as a warm season annual that reseeds reliably, which is why it returns to the same locations year after year. Number 8 is the most misunderstood plant on this list. It has been falsely blamed for causing allergies for over a century based on a case of mistaken identity, and the science inside it is worth far more attention than it has ever received. Number 8. Goldenrod. Number 8 is goldenrod, Solidago canadensis, and its related species, and it has been the victim of one of the most persistent cases of mistaken identity in American botanical history. For generations, goldenrod has been blamed for the sneezing, runny eyes, and misery of late summer hay fever because it blooms in August and September at exactly the same time as ragweed. The truth is that goldenrod is pollinated by insects, not by wind. Its pollen is large, waxy, and too heavy to travel through the air in any meaningful quantity. The actual cause of late-season allergies is ragweed, whose flowers are small, green, and easy to overlook, and whose pollen travels in enormous quantities on the wind. Goldenrod happens to be tall, bright, and visible in the same fields, making it an easy target for blame it did not earn. That reputation has kept it from recognition it deserves, because what science has found inside it is substantial. Goldenrod has been used in Native American medicine by more than 24 tribes, including the Cherokee, Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Zuni, for wound healing, kidney and bladder conditions, fevers, and respiratory infections. It was used in European folk medicine for urinary tract infections and kidney stones for centuries. In Germany today, preparations from Solidago species are approved by health regulators and sold in pharmacies as a treatment for urinary tract inflammation and kidney stones. That kind of formal regulatory approval in a country with rigorous pharmaceutical standards is not given casually. The antimicrobial compounds in goldenrod include saponins, quercetin, rutin, and caffeic acid derivatives. A 2009 study published in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology tested Solidago extracts against multiple bacterial strains and found inhibitory activity against Staphylococcus aureus, Enterococcus faecalis, and Pseudomonas aeruginosa. A study in phytotherapy research found that goldenrod saponins disrupted bacterial cell membranes in ways that reduced the bacteria's capacity to sustain infection. Quercetin, one of goldenrod's main flavonoids, has been studied across multiple disease contexts and shown to reduce inflammatory cytokines, support respiratory epithelial cell health, and demonstrate antiviral activity against several influenza strains. Goldenrod tea, brewed from dried flowers and upper leaves, has been used for urinary tract infections, sinus congestion, respiratory inflammation, and wound washing for centuries. Its anti-inflammatory properties are particularly useful for the urinary tract, where bacterial infection and tissue irritation occur together, and addressing only the bacteria without calming the inflammation leads to a slow and incomplete recovery. Goldenrod grows in USDA plant hardiness zones 3 through 9 as a tall, upright perennial that spreads through underground rhizomes and prolific seed production. It is most medicinally active when harvested at peak bloom, from late July through September, depending on your region. Cutting the flowering tops at that time also limits the most aggressive reseeding if you want to keep it managed. Those 8 plants grow in backyards across America, and the research behind them has been in scientific journals for decades, while most people mow over them on Saturday mornings. If you learned something today, give this video a thumbs up. It helps more people find this channel. See you in the next one.